Today on Project 380 I'm going to be ditching the old PCV system and modifying the valve cover. So you fully understand why I'm modifying the valve cover and why I'm ditching the old PCV system, I'm first going to tell you about how the PCV system works and why it's there. PCV stands for positive crank ventilation. Any normal engine creates positive crank pressure. By this I mean the gases in the combustion chamber that escapes past the piston rings down into the oil system. There is no way of stopping this, it just naturally occurs in any engine. Now this pressure has to go somewhere, if not it will find somewhere to escape. This usually ends up being through a seal. So to prevent the buildup of this pressure we have a PCV system, or a positive crank ventilation system. Now the MX5 engines have two parts to the PCV system. So the first part of the ventilation system is on the exhaust side here. This used to have a pipe connected to it which rerouted itself back into the intake system, which is no longer here. And in a naturally aspirated car that would pull a vacuum, sucking all the crank pressure out. And the second part of the system is this side on the intake. There used to be a PCV valve here that isn't installed at the minute. And on the end of the valve used to be a pipe that went back into the intake. And this side works the same as the exhaust side. This would pull a vacuum, pulling all that pressure out. The stock PCV system works really well at stock power levels. The only thing that will need modifying, if you want to modify it, is the lines in between the intakes. I would suggest putting an air oil separator in the form of a catch can in between the rocker cover and the intake itself. This is going to stop the waste oil being recirculated back through the intake system and then possibly causing detonation. But my engine is modified and hopefully I will be running a good amount of boost. And this is why I'm going to be modifying the rocker cover and getting rid of the PCV system. Because I am running boost, this system doesn't really work properly anymore. Most of that is down to the PCV valve itself that sits here, and the rocker cover itself is quite restrictive. And because I am going to be making boost, that is going to be producing more blow-by. Blow-by is where the exhaust gases sneak past the piston rings down into the crank. That then creates more crank pressure, and that pressure has got to go somewhere and pretty quick. So the PCV valve that used to go here is a valve with a spring and ball bearing in it. Now a quick look at the different PCV valves you'll find in different models. You'll either find a straight one or an angled one. The angled one usually is found in the Mark II 1.8. So these two are made out of plastic and over time they can get a little brittle. As you can see, this one has actually started to crack. But these two can be upgraded with this metal one found out of a 323 GTX, and it does withstand a bit more boost pressure. All three of these work exactly the same, but the metal one from the 323 GTX will withstand a bit more pressure. And it won't break and go brittle like the other two will. So now I'm going to attempt to break this one apart as it's completely useless now and show you what's found inside. So this is the rocker cover or valve cover side and this is the intake side, and pulling it apart you will find a plunger and a spring. Now over time these can gunk up and the valve itself won't be pulled under vacuum. So you'll just have to spray a bit of brake cleaner in it and make sure it's free moving by shaking it, just like this one. In a naturally aspirated engine, the vacuum will pull the valve towards the intake side, but in boost, it will push it towards the valve cover, closing it off, causing a restriction in the gas ventilation. But I am doing away with mine completely, because the intake manifold is going to see boost rather than pulling a vacuum. That PCV valve is actually going to close, causing a restriction in the gas ventilation. So now it's time to rip this rocker cover off and have a look at the PCV system inside the top of the rocker cover. valve cover off the car and on my temporary workbench, we now need to flip it over and peel off the old gasket. On the underside of the rocker cover are 3 thin metal plates. This is actually the baffle plates for the PCV system. These two are held in with 6 screws, this one is held in with 7. If you've never had these off before, these are going to be really tight, so apply a lot of downward pressure and twist it off slowly. These plates are held down with a bit of sealant, so they're a little bit tough to get off. But you can put a flat screwdriver underneath, working your way around to break the sealant and then gently prise them off. Try not to bend the plate in any way. Now with these plates off, we can see how the system works. It's split into 2 parts. The first part is this section and this section. That is the permanently open ventilation system, and this part here, which is the PCV valve side. So looking at the permanently vented side first, the plate that goes on here is actually open there and there, allowing the gases to go into the first compartment, and then down here is an opening hole between the first compartment and the second compartment where the gases can flow through and then out of the vent hole. And on the PCV valve side, the plate also has an opening where the gases could go in, work its way around this compartment and through to the PCV valve itself. This is the Mark II 1.8 and it is different from model to model. So now with all the plates out of the way, we now need to concentrate on this hole here. So with a little bit closer look at this hole, you can see it's fairly small and we want to open that up so we can get as much airflow as we can. This hole actually measures just over 6mm and I want to open that up as big as I could go, which is about 9.2mm. But because the hole is at a slight angle and it's got a lip on it, I'm going to first start it off with a step drill to take the lip off. Now with that little lip away, I could go through with my 9.2mm drill. When you're doing this, make sure when you go through not to damage this compartment. So I've drilled the hole as deep as I dare. As you can see, hopefully, I've only just broken through into the middle chamber. So now I'm just going to take this edge down slightly with a die grinder. Because with the plate on top, there is a small recess in this plate allowing the air to come up and into this chamber, and I want to get as much airflow as possible, and hopefully taking this little lip off will give it a little bit more flow. So that's the hole going between these 2 chambers, opened up as much as I dare. But there is no hole on the valve side itself to open up, that's already free flowing down here. So now I've opened this up to flow a bit more, I now need to open up this part. And what I'm going to do is weld an AN10 bung onto them. I'm going to put this in a vise and wiggle it out. Now I want to weld on my AN10 bung. I'm not quite happy with it sitting like that. I'm actually going to put an AN10 bung this side as well, so that sits at a little bit of an angle. So what I'm going to do is grind this down a bit, open up this hole and have the bung sitting a similar angle to the other side. I've ground this down at a similar angle to the valve side, so hopefully once the 2 AN bungs are welded on, they're sitting at a very similar angle. So now I'm going to open this hole up to 12mm to match the hole in the AN10 bung. And on the valve side, all I need to do is remove the rubber grommet. And now I'm almost ready to weld in the AN10 bungs each side. But I've got to clean up all this powder coat, a good area, so it doesn't get sucked into the weld. It's not just the outside that needs cleaning before welding. It's actually the inside as well. As you can see, there's loads of burnt on oil, and that will get sucked into the weld when it's heated up. With as much roughly cleaned as I can, I'm now going to come in with some brake cleaner and a rag. Then I'm going to finish up with some pure acetone. Now, after all that prep work, I can finally weld it. With both the AN10 bungs welded onto the valve cover, now it's time to put the baffle plates on the back after giving it a good clean. But I'm not going to be permanently installing the valve cover just yet, as I'm going to send it away for powder coating. If you were putting the valve cover straight back on, make sure everything is really clean of dirt and debris. Put a tiny bit of sealant around all the mating faces of the baffle plates, and put a little bit of blue Loctite on those screws. Do them down nice and tight. You don't want those screws to fall down into the valve train. My valve cover is nice and clean, so I'm going to temporarily put it back on the engine to show you why I've put the AN10 bungs on it. This port used to reroute itself back into the intake system before the intake manifold, and this port used to be the PCV valve, which then rerouted itself back into the inlet manifold. Now, both of those are not going to be rerouted into the inlet system. They're going to be vented to atmosphere, and I can't just vent them to atmosphere like that, so I'm going to run them into a catch can. Ideally, I would have liked to use the Dave Fab catch can that sits about there, but because I've got the Skunk 2 manifold and the coolant reroute, I don't think I've got the space for it, so I'm going to be putting one over there. Of course, it's near a lot of hot components, so I'm going to have to put a little bit of heat protective on the AN10 lines and possibly the catch can. This isn't the ideal place to put a catch can, but it's where I've got the most space available. So that is the valve cover all welded up and modified, and an oil catch can installed. All the lines are around the back here. I'm going to need to put a little bit of heat protectant here because the downpipe's quite close to it, so we don't want that to melt. Hopefully now, with the valve cover modified and the PCV system deleted, I now know my engine is going to be safe from excessive blow-by or positive crank pressure build-up. Hopefully now I'm not going to get a gasket pushed out by excess pressure, and I'm not going to have that old dirty oil recycled into the intake system. So I've got to rip this all back off again and send it to the powder coaters. If this video did help you in any way, please leave it down in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you are new, and I'll see you next time.